The call for help. The dimly lit bar on a backwater station named Person 9 reeked of stale beer, bird circuits, and desperation. The patrons were a mix of alien species and humans, all lost souls seeking an escape from their pasts. Among them sat Marcus Vance, a scarred ex-military operative nursing his whiskey in a corner booth. He had seen his fair share of battles and betrayals, and had little patience left for the galaxy's injustices. The world had broken him, but it hadn't made him indifferent. As Marcus took another sip, a shadow fell over his table. He instinctively reached for his sidearm, but his hand stopped mid-motion when he looked up. Standing before him was a tall, slender alien cloaked in silver fabric, their large, luminescent eyes darting nervously. "You are Marcus Vance," the alien said, their voice a melodic hum that somehow carried an edge of urgency. Marcus leaned back, his eyes narrowing. "Depends on who's asking." "I am Nyessa, envoy of the Icteri." "My people need your help," the alien said, pulling back their hood to reveal delicate green scales that shimmered under the flickering bar lights. Marcus sighed, already regretting not brushing the stranger off. "I'm retired. Find someone else." Nyessa placed a small holo device on the table. With a flick of her clawed hand, an image hovered between them. It showed a young Icteri girl, bound and surrounded by heavily armed soldiers. Her eyes burned with fear and defiance. "She is my daughter," Nyessa said, her voice trembling. "The Lorcan Syndicate has taken her, intending to use her as leverage against my people. They will kill her if we do not submit to their demands." Marcus scowled. The Lorcan Syndicate was a notorious criminal organization, infamous for enslaving entire worlds. He knew better than to get involved, but the desperation in Nyessa's voice tugged at a part of him he thought long buried. "Why me?" Marcus asked. "Surely there are better options than a washed-up soldier." Nyessa hesitated. "The Lorcan Syndicate operates in the shadows, with no regard for life or law. The Icteri are a peaceful race. We do not have the means to fight back. But humans are different. You are ruthless, resourceful, and relentless. We need someone who can do what we cannot." Marcus stared at the image of the girl. Something in her defiant expression reminded him of his younger sister, lost years ago to another senseless war. He drained his glass and stood. "I'm going to regret this," he muttered. "Fine. I'll help, but I'm not doing it for free." Nyessa nodded, relief washing over her features. "I can pay. Whatever you ask, it will be arranged. Just bring her back alive." "Then you'd better start prepping the credits," Marcus said, slaying his worn jacket over his shoulder. "We leave at dawn." Part 2. Into the Den of Shadows. Marcus and Nyessa boarded a rusting freighter, its patched hull rattling as it launched from Person 9. Their destination, Tau Corvus, a lawless moon at the edge of Icteri space and home to the Lorcan Syndicate's operations. The journey was tense, with Marcus poring over intel Nyessa had gathered. Maps of Lorcan compounds, schematics of their weapons, and patrol schedules flashed across the ship's main display. "You've done your homework," Marcus admitted grudgingly. Nyessa nodded. "I have had no choice. But information can only take us so far. The Syndicate thrives on chaos. They are unpredictable." Marcus smirked. "Unpredictable, huh? Sounds like my kind of fight." As they neared Tau Corvus, the freighter scanners pinged with warnings. Syndicate patrol ships orbited the moon like vultures. Marcus expertly piloted the freighter into a dense asteroid field, using the debris to mask their approach. They slipped through the Syndicate's defenses and landed on a desolate stretch of the moon's surface. "Stay here," Marcus ordered Nyessa as he checked his weapons. A plasma rifle, 2 sidearms, and an assortment of grenades. "If I'm not back in 48 hours, get off this rock." Nyssa grabbed his arm, her eyes wide with fear. "Be careful. They are monsters." Marcus smirked. "So am I." The Lorcan Syndicate's compound was a fortress of steel and stone, its walls bristling with turrets and guards. Marcus approached under the cover of darkness, his years of training kicking in. He scaled a nearby cliff to gain a vantage point, surveying the layout. Guards patrolled in pairs, their movements disciplined but predictable. Automated drones hovered overhead, scanning for intruders. Marcus tapped into their communications, using a stolen syndicate device to disrupt their systems. "Time to stir the pot," he muttered, setting off a series of small explosives near the compound's perimeter. As the guards rushed to investigate, he slipped inside. The interior was a maze of corridors and heavily guarded rooms. Marcus moved like a shadow, dispatching guards with silent precision. He followed the intel to the Syndicate's holding cells, where he found rows of prisoners locked in energy cages. His heart sank as he saw the conditions they were kept in, malnourished, beaten, and terrified. "Focus," he whispered to himself, scanning the cells for Nyessa's daughter. Finally, he found her. The girl was sitting cross-legged, her eyes closed in quiet defiance. She looked up as Marcus deactivated the energy field, her expression wary but hopeful. "Your mom sent me," Marcus said. "Let's get out of here." She nodded, but before they could move, alarms blared. The Syndicate had discovered his infiltration. "Stay close," Marcus ordered, handing her a small plasma pistol. "And if you have to shoot, aim for the chest." The two of them navigated the chaos as guards flooded the corridors. Marcus fought with ruthless efficiency, his combat instincts keeping them alive. Explosions rocked the compound as he set off more charges, creating a path of destruction that disoriented their pursuers. They made it to the freighter just as Syndicate ships descended on their position. Marcus shoved the girl into the cockpit and fired up the engines. "Hold on," he yelled as they lifted off, the freighter shaking violently under enemy fire. He piloted the ship through the asteroid field, dodging laser blasts and outmaneuvering their attackers. When they finally broke free of the Syndicate's reach, Marcus let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. Nyssa rushed to embrace her daughter, tears streaming down her face. "You did it," she said, turning to Marcus. "You saved her." Marcus slumped into a chair, exhaustion etched into his features. "Don't thank me yet. The Syndicate won't let this slide. We've just painted targets on all our backs." Nyessa's expression hardened. "Then we fight. For my people. For all those the Syndicate has enslaved." Marcus looked at her, surprised by the fire in her voice. He nodded slowly. "All right, let's make them pay." With that, the freighter sped off into the stars, carrying the seeds of rebellion and the promise of vengeance. The fight was far from over, but for the first time in years, Marcus felt alive. The rising storm. The freighter soared through the endless expanse of space, its patched engines humming a steady rhythm. Inside, the mood was anything but calm. Marcus Vance leaned against the bulkhead, his eyes closed as he replayed the events at the Syndicate compound in his mind. His body ached from bruises and burns, but it wasn't the pain that gnawed at him. It was the knowledge that their escape was only the beginning. Across the cabin, Nyssa knelt beside her daughter, Shara. The girl, though young, exuded an eerie composure. She sat cross-legged, her sharp green eyes scanning the room as though expecting an attack at any moment. "She's tough," Marcus muttered, opening one eye to observe them. "More than most adults I've met." Nyssa glanced at him, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "The Ictari do not have the luxury of weakness. Shira has endured more than any child should." Shira spoke for the first time, her voice steady and quiet. "They won't stop. The Syndicate will come for us again." Marcus gave her a grim nod. You're not wrong, kid. The Lorcan Syndicate doesn't forgive or forget, but we'll be ready for them. Nyessa stood, her voice firm. We must do more than be ready. We must strike first. The Syndicate has enslaved hundreds of Icteri. We cannot leave them to suffer. Marcus raised an eyebrow. You're talking about an all-out war. You sure you're ready for that? Nyssa met his gaze, her eyes blazing with determination. If we do nothing, the Syndicate will destroy us anyway. I would rather die fighting for my people than live as a coward. Marcus let out a low whistle. All right then, looks like I've signed up for more than a simple rescue mission. Planning the revolution. The freighter landed on a remote asteroid base, hidden within the Veil Nebula, a region of space notorious for its dense cosmic storms and navigation hazards. The base, known as Haven, was a hub for those who opposed the Syndicate, smugglers, outlaws, and survivors who had nowhere else to turn. As Marcus disembarked, he was greeted by a grizzled human mechanic named Taro, whose cybernetic arm whirred as he extended it for a handshake. Vance, Taro said, his voice like gravel. Didn't think I'd see you again. Figured you were either dead or retired. Marcus smirked. Almost both. Got a job that needs doing. Big one. Taro's gaze shifted to Nyessa and Shara. Icteri, huh? If you're bringing them here, I'm guessing this involves the Syndicate. It does, Marcus replied. We're going to take them down. Taro snorted. Ambitious. Stupid, but ambitious. What's the plan? Inside the base's war room, a holographic map of the Syndicate's operations hovered in the air. Marcus, Nyessa, and Taro stood around it, flanked by a motley crew of rebels, alien mercenaries, rogue AI units, and battle-hardened survivors. We hit them where it hurts, Marcus said, pointing to key locations on the map. Supply depots, communication hubs, and recruitment centers. We cut off their resources, cripple their operations, and free their captives. Taro scratched his chin, bold, but they've got an army. We've got this. He gestured to the Ragtag group. Nyessa stepped forward, her voice steady and commanding. The Syndicate's strength is built on fear. If we show the galaxy that they can be defeated, others will join our cause. A low murmur of agreement rippled through the room. Marcus nodded. We don't need an army to start a fire. We just need a spark. The first strike. Their first target was a Syndicate outpost on the edge of Icteri space. The facility was a vital supply depot, housing weapons, ammunition, and fuel for the Syndicate's fleet. Taking it out would deal a significant blow to their operations. Marcus led a small team, including Nyessa and Taro, on the assault. As they approached the outpost under the cover of darkness, the tension was palpable. The plan was simple: infiltrate, plant explosives, and get out before the Syndicate realized what hit them. The team split into pairs, moving silently through the compound. Marcus and Nyessa took the eastern wing, where the main fuel tanks were located. Taro and his partner, a towering insectoid alien named Driss, headed for the armory. Marcus pressed a finger to his earpiece. Keep it quiet. We don't want to wake the hornet's nest until we're ready. They slipped past patrolling guards, using the shadows for cover. When they reached the fuel tanks, Marcus set to work planting explosives while Nyessa kept watch. Why do you fight? Nyessa asked quietly, her eyes scanning the perimeter. Marcus paused, his hands steady as he armed a charge. Because I've seen what happens when no one does. I've lost too many people to sit on the sidelines. Nyessa nodded, a flicker of understanding in her gaze. Perhaps we are not so different. Before Marcus could respond, a shout echoed through the compound. The alarm blared, and the once quiet outpost erupted into chaos. Looks like we're out of time, Marcus muttered. Detonators are armed. Let's move. The team regrouped at the extraction point, exchanging fire with syndicate guards as they retreated. Explosions rocked the compound, sending plumes of fire and debris into the sky. The team barely made it to their ship before the facility was engulfed in flames. As they sped away, Marcus looked out the viewport, watching the inferno consume the outpost. One down, he said. Plenty more to go. A spark of hope. The attack on the outpost sent shockwaves through the syndicate's ranks. Word spread quickly, and across the galaxy, whispers of rebellion began to take root. On Icturi worlds, oppressed workers rose up against their captors, emboldened by the news that the syndicate could be defeated. But Marcus knew the fight was far from over. The syndicate would retaliate, and their enemies would not underestimate them again. Back at Haven, the mood was a mix of celebration and preparation. The rebels had won their first victory, but the war had only just begun. Nessa approached Marcus as he cleaned his weapons in the base's armory. "You have given my people hope," she said. "For the first time in years, they believe freedom is possible." Marcus looked up, his expression serious. "Hope's a good start, but it won't be enough to win this war. We need to be smarter, faster, and tougher than them." Nessa placed a hand on his shoulder. "We will be together." As the rebels prepared for their next mission, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that the stakes were about to get even higher. The syndicate was ruthless, and their response would be swift and brutal. But Marcus was ready. He had found a cause worth fighting for, and he wouldn't stop until the syndicate was nothing but a memory. To be continued in Part 3, The Syndicate Strikes Back. The Syndicate Strikes Back. The news of the rebels' victory over the syndicate outpost spread like wildfire, fueling unrest across the galaxy. On dozens of worlds, whispers of resistance began to rise, and for the first time in years, the syndicate found itself on the defensive. But the victory came at a price. The syndicate was now fully aware of the growing rebellion, and they were preparing to strike back with a vengeance. In the dimly lit war room of the Haven base, Marcus Vance stood before a holographic map, his arms crossed and his brow furrowed. Around him, Nyessa Taro and the other rebel leaders studied the display intently. It showed the syndicate's growing fleet of ships, now mobilizing for an assault on Icturi space. "They're coming," Marcus said, his voice grim. "And they're not just here to make a statement. They're here to crush us." Taro grunted, adjusting the servo in his cybernetic arm. "Figures. The syndicate's like a cornered animal, dangerous and desperate. They won't stop until they've buried every trace of rebellion." Nessa stepped forward, her face resolute. "Then we must be ready. We cannot allow them to retake what we fought so hard to gain." The room fell silent as Marcus tapped a button, bringing up a new image. A sprawling syndicate stronghold located deep within a canyon on the desert moon of Sarin III. It was a fortress, heavily fortified and bristling with weapons. According to their intelligence, this was the syndicate's staging ground for the coming invasion. "We need to hit this base before they can launch their fleet," Marcus said. "Take out their command center, disrupt their operations, and buy us time to rally more allies." Taro whistled low. "That place is a death trap. You really think we can pull this off?" Marcus smirked, his eyes gleaming with determination. "I've pulled off crazier missions. The question is, are you in?" Taro chuckled. "You're insane." "But yeah, I'm in." Nessa nodded as well. "We all are. For the Icturi, for freedom. Preparing for the mission." The next few days were a whirlwind of activity as the rebels prepared for their most daring mission yet. In the base's hangar, mechanics worked around the clock to outfit their ships with extra armor and firepower. Soldiers trained tirelessly, honing their skills and preparing for the fight of their lives. Marcus oversaw every detail, his military experience proving invaluable. He worked tirelessly, barely pausing to eat or sleep, driven by the knowledge that failure was not an option. One evening, as the preparations continued, Marcus found himself in the training hall, watching Nyessa spar with another rebel. Despite her elegant appearance, she moved with a fierce precision, her strikes swift and deadly. "You're pretty good," Marcus remarked as she disarmed her opponent with a quick twist of her blade. Nyessa turned to him, a faint smile on her lips. "The Iktari are not warriors by nature, but we are fast learners." Marcus nodded. "That's good. You're going to need every advantage you can get out there." Nyessa hesitated, then stepped closer. "And what about you, Marcus? Why do you fight? You could have walked away after rescuing Shira, but you stayed. Why?" Marcus's expression darkened, his gaze distant. "Because I've seen what happens when no one stands up to people like the Syndicate. I've lost too many friends, too many comrades, to their greed and cruelty. This time, I'm not running. This time, I'm fighting back." Nyessa studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Then let us fight together, for all we've lost, and for all we hope to gain." The infiltration. The night of the mission arrived, and the rebels launched their assault under the cover of darkness. A small strike team, led by Marcus, Nyessa, and Taro, infiltrated the Syndicate stronghold, while the rest of the rebel fleet engaged the Syndicate's outer defenses in a diversionary attack. The desert moon of Sarin III was an unforgiving wasteland, its surface baked by relentless heat during the day and plunged into freezing cold at night. The Syndicate's fortress loomed ahead, its massive walls carved into the rocky canyon. As they approached, Marcus signaled for the team to halt. He studied the patrol patterns of the guards, then motioned for the others to follow him. "Stay low and keep quiet," he whispered. "We don't get a second chance at this." The team moved silently through the shadows, slipping past patrols and security drones. They reached a ventilation shaft that led into the heart of the fortress. One by one, they climbed inside, the narrow passage forcing them to crawl on their hands and knees. Inside, the air was thick with the hum of machinery and the distant clatter of boots. Marcus led the team to the command center, using a stolen Syndicate access card to bypass the security doors. They entered the room undetected, taking out the guards with silent efficiency. Marcus approached the main console and began downloading the Syndicate's data, his fingers flying across the keyboard. "This should give us everything we need: fleet movements, supply routes, even the locations of their hidden bases." Nyessa kept watch by the door, her blade drawn. "Hurry. They'll realize we're here soon." As if on cue, alarms blared throughout the fortress. The team's cover was blown. The fight of their lives. Syndicate soldiers poured into the room, their plasma rifles blazing. The rebels fought back fiercely, using the console for cover as they returned fire. Marcus barked orders, coordinating their defense and ensuring they didn't get overwhelmed. "Hold the line," he shouted. "We're almost done." Taro's cybernetic arm whirred as he fired his plasma cannon, blasting through the enemy ranks. Nyessa moved with deadly grace, her blade slicing through the soldiers who got too close. Despite their efforts, the Syndicate's numbers were overwhelming. The team was forced to retreat, fighting their way through the labyrinthine corridors of the fortress. Explosions rocked the walls as Taro planted charges to slow their pursuers. "Marcus, we're running out of time," Nyessa called over the chaos. Marcus glanced at the data drive in his hand, then at his team. "We're almost there, just a little further." They reached the extraction point, where their ship waited with engines roaring. As they boarded, Marcus turned and fired one last shot, taking out a pursuing Syndicate soldier. The hatch slammed shut, and the ship lifted off, racing away from the fortress as the charges detonated, engulfing the base in flames. A Pyrrhic victory. Back at Haven, the rebels gathered to review the data they had stolen. It revealed the full extent of the Syndicate's operations, as well as evidence of their connections to powerful corporations and corrupt officials. "This is it," Marcus said, holding up the drive. "This is how we take them down." But the victory was bittersweet. Many rebels had fallen during the mission, and the Syndicate's retaliation had left several Icteria colonies in ruins. The cost of the fight was growing, and Marcus knew that the hardest battles were still ahead. As he stood on the observation deck, staring out at the stars, Nyessa joined him. "You did well today," she said. "We all did," Marcus replied. "But it's not enough. Not yet." Nyessa placed a hand on his shoulder. "Then we keep fighting. Together." Marcus nodded, his resolve stealing. The Syndicate had struck back, but the rebels had survived. And now they had the means to strike harder than ever before. The fire within. The Syndicate's fortress on Saren III lay in ruins, but the battle was far from over. The data stolen by the rebels painted a grim picture. The Syndicate was not merely a collection of criminals, but a vast interconnected network with ties to corrupt corporations, government officials, and even mercenary factions. Their influence stretched far beyond the shadows, and their retaliation was already underway. The Haven base buzzed with activity as the rebels prepared for what they knew would be an all-out war. Ships were repaired, weapons were upgraded, and new recruits arrived daily. Displaced Icteri, former slaves, and even disillusioned mercenaries who had grown tired of the Syndicate's brutality. In the war room, Marcus Vance stood at the center of a tense gathering. Holograms of Syndicate-controlled worlds hovered around him, casting an eerie blue light across his face. Beside him, Nyessa studied the projections with grim determination, her hand resting on the hilt of her ceremonial blade. "This is what we're up against," Marcus said, his voice steady but firm. "The Syndicate isn't just a criminal empire. They've embedded themselves into the fabric of galactic society. If we're going to bring them down, we can't just fight them head-on. We have to cut out the heart of their operation." Taro leaned against the wall, his cybernetic arm whirring softly as he adjusted its settings. "Cut out the heart, huh? Easier said than done. These bastards are everywhere." "They may be everywhere," Nyessa said, her voice calm but resolute. "But they are not invincible. We have something they fear, hope. And now, with this data, we have the means to expose their corruption." Marcus nodded. "Exactly. We're not just fighting them with guns and ships. We're fighting them with information. If we can show the galaxy who they really are, we'll turn their own allies against them." The seeds of resistance. The first step in their plan was to broadcast the stolen data across the galaxy. But doing so wouldn't be easy. The Syndicate controlled much of the galactic communications network, and the rebels would need to seize one of their primary broadcasting hubs to ensure the message reached every corner of space. The hub, located on the industrial planet of Calvex 4, was a fortress in its own right. Towering spires of steel and glass pierced the sky, bristling with defense turrets, and patrolled by elite Syndicate mercenaries. The rebels knew it would be a suicide mission if they didn't approach it carefully. In the planning room, Marcus laid out the operation. We split into 3 teams. Team Alpha creates a diversion at the main gates, drawing their forces away. Team Bravo infiltrates the central tower and takes out their communications array. Team Charlie, that's us, heads for the control room to upload the data. We'll have a small window before their reinforcements arrive, so we need to move fast. Nyessa studied the map intently. And what happens if they jam our signal before we finish the upload? They won't, Marcus said, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. Because we're going to rig their systems to broadcast on every channel simultaneously. They won't be able to shut it down without dismantling their entire network. Taro let out a low whistle. You really like to make things complicated, don't you? Marcus grinned. Complicated is what I do best. The assault on Calvex 4. The rebel fleet arrived in the Calvex system under the cover of the planet's perpetual storms. Lightning flashed across the skies as their ships descended, weaving through thick clouds to avoid detection. Marcus's team landed in the shadow of a massive factory complex, their ship blending in with the industrial sprawl. Team Alpha launched their diversionary attack first, drawing the Syndicate's forces to the outer perimeter. Explosions rocked the gates as rebel fighters engaged the mercenaries, their weapons blazing in the darkness. Inside the complex, Marcus led Team Charlie through the labyrinthine corridors of the main tower. The air was thick with the hum of machinery and the acrid smell of burning fuel. Every step was a calculated risk, every corner a potential ambush. Keep moving, Marcus whispered, his plasma rifle at the ready. We don't have time to waste. Nyessa and Taro flanked him, their weapons drawn as they scanned for threats. Behind them, a group of Iktaryu rebels followed, their faces set with determination. They reached the control room without incident, but as they prepared to breach the door, alarms suddenly blared throughout the tower. They know we're here, Taro muttered, gripping his plasma cannon. This is about to get messy. Marcus nodded. Stick to the plan. We hold them off while Nyessa gets the data uploaded. The broadcast. The control room was a chaotic mix of flashing lights and holographic displays. Nyessa rushed to the central console, her fingers flying over the controls as she prepared the upload. Meanwhile, Marcus and Taro took up defensive positions by the door, firing at the Syndicate forces that swarmed toward them. The Syndicate soldiers were relentless, their weapons tearing through the walls and consoles as they advanced. Marcus gritted his teeth, his plasma rifle growing hot in his hands as he fought to hold them back. Nyessa, how much longer? He called out over the din. Almost there, she replied, her voice steady despite the chaos. Just a few more seconds. A grenade exploded nearby, sending shrapnel and sparks flying. Marcus shielded his face, his ears ringing as he returned fire. He could feel the weight of the battle pressing down on him, but he refused to give in. Finally, Nyessa stepped back from the console, her face alight with triumph. It's done. The data is broadcasting. The Syndicate's response. Across the galaxy, the Syndicate's crimes were laid bare. Images and records of their atrocities flashed across every screen, from bustling city squares to quiet farming colonies. Their alliances with corrupt officials and corporations were exposed, sparking outrage and rebellion in countless systems. But the Syndicate was not defeated yet. As Marcus and his team fought their way back to the extraction point, they received word that reinforcements were closing in. A massive Syndicate fleet had entered the system, determined to crush the rebellion once and for all. We need to get out of here, Marcus said, his voice grim as they boarded their ship. This isn't over yet. The spark of revolution. As the rebels fled Calvex 4, they left behind a galaxy forever changed. The Syndicate's grip on power was beginning to slip, their allies abandoning them as the truth came to light. But Marcus knew the fight was far from over. Back at Haven, the rebels regrouped, their numbers bolstered by new recruits inspired by the broadcast. Nyessa stood beside Marcus as they surveyed their growing fleet, her expression resolute. We've given the galaxy a spark of hope, she said. Now we must turn it into a fire. Marcus nodded, his jaw set with determination. Then let's burn them to the ground. The fall of the Syndicate. The Syndicate was unraveling, its once unassailable empire now fractured by rebellion and betrayal. Across the galaxy, oppressed workers and displaced peoples rose up, emboldened by the rebels' broadcast of their crimes. Entire factions that once feared or served the Syndicate turned against them, creating a wave of chaos that even their ruthless leaders struggled to contain. But Marcus Vance knew that desperation made the Syndicate even more dangerous. Quartered animals fought hardest, and the rebels would need to be stronger, smarter, and more united than ever if they were to deliver the final blow. A desperate council. In the heart of Haven, the rebel leadership gathered in the war room. The holographic map in the center of the room displayed the galaxy, with Syndicate strongholds marked in red. Many of these red dots blinked, signaling ongoing battles or territories lost to rebellion. But one dot remained solid, a fortress world deep in uncharted space. "That's their command center," Marcus said, pointing to the flickering red marker. "The Nexus. It's where the Syndicate's leadership is based, where they control their fleets, and where they keep their war chest." Taro crossed his arms, his cybernetic arm whirring softly. "You're saying we hit the Nexus directly. That's suicide." Nessa stepped forward, her voice calm but resolute. "It's our only option. The Syndicate's leadership is the heart of their power. If we destroy it, their entire network will collapse." "But it's more than just a fortress," Marcus added. "The Nexus is a mobile space station, heavily armed and protected by an entire fleet. Getting to it won't be easy." The room fell silent as the weight of the task sank in. Then a voice broke the tension. "It doesn't have to be easy," said Driss, the towering insectoid warrior who had joined the rebellion after the battle on Calvec Spore. "It just has to be possible." Marcus smirked. "That's the spirit." A plan of boldness. The plan they devised was daring and complex, relying on precision and coordination. The rebels would launch a three-pronged assault on the Syndicate's outer defenses to draw their fleet away from the Nexus. Meanwhile, a small strike team, led by Marcus and Nessa, would infiltrate the station to plant explosives and disable its power core. Taro would command the fleet, leading the diversionary attack and holding the Syndicate's forces at bay long enough for the strike team to complete their mission. Driss and his ground troops would create chaos within the Syndicate's ranks, targeting key outposts to further divide their attention. "This is it," Marcus said as the plan was finalized. "The final push. If we succeed, we end the Syndicate. If we fail—" He didn't finish the sentence, but everyone in the room understood. Failure meant annihilation, not just for them, but for every system that had risen up against their oppressors. The battle begins. The rebel fleet emerged from hyperspace in a flash of light, bearing down on the Syndicate's outer defenses. Ships of all shapes and sizes, from salvage freighters to heavily armed cruisers, engaged the enemy fleet in a chaotic melee. Explosions lit up the void as plasma bolts and missile salvos streaked across the battlefield. On board the rebel flagship, Taro barked orders into his comms, directing squadrons to flank the Syndicate's ships. His cybernetic arm controlled the targeting systems with inhuman precision, taking out enemy vessels with ruthless efficiency. "Hold the line," he shouted. "We're buying time for Marcus and Nessa. Don't let them break through." Infiltrating the Nexus. While the battle raged outside, Marcus, Nessa, and their strike team slipped through the chaos in a cloaked transport. The Nexus loomed ahead, a massive rotating station bristling with weapons and shield generators. Its surface gleamed like polished obsidian, a stark contrast to the grim purpose it served. "Everyone knows the plan," Marcus said as they approached an access port. "Stick together, stay sharp, and don't stop moving." They breached the station's outer hull and entered its labyrinthine corridors. Inside, the atmosphere was tense and sterile, with dim lighting casting long shadows. Syndicate guards patrolled the halls, their movements methodical and robotic. The strike team moved swiftly and silently, taking out guards with suppressed weapons and avoiding detection whenever possible. Marcus led the way, his years of military training evident in every step. Nessa followed close behind, her blade drawn and her eyes scanning for threats. They reached the power core, a massive chamber filled with humming machinery and glowing conduits. Marcus began planting explosives around the core, his hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. "This is almost too easy." Taro's voice crackled over the comm. "I don't like it." Marcus smirked. "Relax, Taro. We've got this." But as he spoke, an alarm blared, and the station's automated defenses came to life. Turrets descended from the ceiling, and heavily armed syndicate troops poured into the chamber. "So much for easy," Marcus muttered, drawing his plasma rifle. "Nessa, keep them off me. I need a few more minutes." The turning point. The battle in the power core was intense. Plasma bolts sizzled through the air, and explosions shook the station as the strike team fought desperately to hold their ground. Nessa moved like a whirlwind, her blade flashing as she took down soldier after soldier. Marcus worked furiously, arming the last of the charges and sensing them to a remote detonator. "We're done here," Marcus shouted. "Fall back." The team retreated through the corridors, fighting their way back to the transport. Syndicate reinforcements closed in from all sides, but the rebels held them off with grit and determination. By the time they reached the docking bay, Marcus's rifle was nearly out of ammo, and Nessa's blade was stained with blood. They boarded the transport and launched just as the charges detonated. The Nexus shuddered violently, its power core exploding in a blinding flash of light. Fires erupted across the station, and its massive structure began to collapse. The end of an empire. As the Nexus fell, the Syndicate's fleet faltered. With their command structure in disarray and their leaders dead or fleeing, the remaining ships were easy prey for the rebel forces. Taro's flagship delivered the final blow, obliterating the last of the Syndicate's cruisers in a spectacular explosion. Cheers erupted across the rebel fleet as the Syndicate's reign of terror came to an end. On dozens of worlds, enslaved populations took up arms, driving out the last remnants of their oppressors. The galaxy, once shrouded in fear, now burned with the light of hope. A new dawn. Back at Haven, the rebels celebrated their hard-won victory. The mood was jubilant, but Marcus remained somber. He stood on the observation deck, staring out at the stars. Nessa joined him, her presence quiet and steady. "We did it," she said softly. "The Syndicate is finished." Marcus nodded. "Yeah, but the galaxy's still a mess. There's a lot of work to do." Nessa placed a hand on his shoulder. "Then we will do it. Together." For the first time in years, Marcus allowed himself a small smile. The fight had cost them dearly, but it had also given them something invaluable, a chance to build a better future. And as the stars stretched out before them, Marcus knew that the fire they had ignited would burn bright for generations to come.